Well, this is the Encounter Faith Podcast. My name is Ross, and I'm here with Max Schiewe. Max, welcome back.
What up?
You can tell that this is Max is our Gen Z representative because he said the phrase, what up? It's good to be with you again, bud. Where I'm hoping we go today is diving into a message that for folks who are part of Good Shepherd, they'll hear this in context. They'll be able to go watch your sermon as you and I record this. We're talking a little bit before you deliver the sermon, but before we dive into the message today, we're basically in the middle-ish of a Revelation series. We as a church decided over the summer, we're going to do the thing you would totally expect what every church is doing, that we dive into the apocalyptic literature that you can find at the end of the Bible. What I'm curious for you as someone who's been able to preachable spaces, walk through this as just a member of this community, I'm curious how you balance both the practical reality of like, this is the summer, so some people are gone and we might repeat ourselves, to, well, the book itself kind of repeats itself. Like, I'm just sort of just looking for a check engine light related to Revelation and where you hope people are at collectively before we talk about your message specifically.
Yeah. So the encouragement here is that if you have listened to a number of Sunday morning messages and walked away and said to yourself, the text might have been different, but I feel like I took away the same kind of broad theme about Babylon bad, Lamb good, allegiance is to the Lamb, Jesus victorious in the end. You're not alone.
Yeah.
That's kind of the point. Revelation as a text, if you read through a lot of the different chapters, sure, the imagery and the different visions that John receives are very different, but they are often reinforcing the same point. Return to the Lord, turn away from the temptation and the evil of Babylon, align yourself with the Lamb, and you will share in his victory.
Right.
And so it's something that can become rather difficult to preach. So we can unpack a text and there's all these things going on and here's the imagery, but we land the plane in the same point.
Right.
And the scripture, when it comes to repetition, it's not like a lack of creativity. Like the authors really wanted to drag out the longest possible book even further, and they just ran out of good ideas. But repetition is often something that exists when they're really trying to hammer in a certain point.
Totally.
The message here is something that is of the utmost importance, and John wants to reinforce it time and time again for the building of our faith.
Right. I like that, and I like that we start there because I think we talked about this at the very beginning of this series, approaching Revelation like a timeline to figure out naturally leads you to approach the content of the book of Revelation as a linear story. And the reality is when you approach it with more of a thematic lens, like what Max is describing, when you approach it with an understanding that these stories are told, Elizabeth described it as the same story told from like a different point of view or a different perspective. The weird book at the end of the Bible begins to make a lot of sense, or at least a lot more sense. You get to talk about worship, and I'm mindful of a couple of things. One, I'm someone who tried to carry a tune in a bucket once and I tripped. So the idea of, I feel fairly just imposter syndrome, me having any sort of conversation around worship, but also even in that sentence, that shows a sort of fundamental misunderstanding of what worship actually is. So when you think about folks within this broader context of the Revelation series, within the broader context of the book, what is sort of the thesis of the message, to use the seminarian term? Like, what are you hoping people walk away from knowing?
Yeah, the thesis of the message is essentially worship is crucial to the way we follow Jesus, and worship encompasses much more than we often make it out to be. So if you are to read that text in Revelation, this week it's going to be in Revelation 14. When it talks about giving your worship to God and not being willing to worship the beast, there's much more underneath the surface to that concept of worship than what we think of. For us, worship is oftentimes just like this really awesome 3-song set that we do at the start of service. And that's worship. And it is, but to generalize and say that's all worship is just people singing songs together, is not really gathering a complete picture.
Yeah, I like that.
To worship the Lamb is so much more. One, it's not about us. This is one of the points that I'll make. And in going along with like the idea of worship just being singing songs, for a lot of us, it's something we're like very oddly nitpicky about. Like the idea that I can't worship unless it's a very particular set of songs in a very particular kind of ambiance or environment.
Totally.
With a very particular, kind of sound, and it's the right musicians that I like to hear from. It's like, man, are we missing the point?
Totally.
And it's not so bad to have things that we prefer, but worship does not begin or center around us in any way.
Yeah.
It starts being centered around God, and we build our picture of it from there.
And I know you'll talk about this, but like the correlation, we often will look at something that happens in church that's uncomfortable and go, oh, well, that was weird, or that wasn't God, or that was church. And we sell God short of like, no, actually, I wanted you to pay particular attention to the parts that made you uncomfortable. And that can happen in the 3-song opening set where, let's be honest, dear listener, a lot of you are only hearing one of those songs because you're coming into church a little hot, but also because we almost can expect that comfort. We can cater. And it reminds me of that Francis Chan quote where he talks about someone saying, I didn't like worship today. And he looked at them and said, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Did it ever occur to you that we're not worshiping you? And when we humbly approach that space, that even those times that we may be in an American church context sort of defaults to this is what worship is, it begins to fundamentally change. But when you talk about it being something that is more embodied or something that is bigger than how people approach it, one thing that I know a lot of worship leaders are really sensitive about is they can craft the environment. There's science about chord changes and key changes that can move people emotionally. But when I read the book of Revelation, or what I think about what you're talking about, other folks have described it as the difference between like a touching experience versus a transformational experience. Worship is meant to be transformational in that framework, but it often just feels like a emotional experience or a touching experience. How do we orient our lives so that worship can be the type of transformational experience that we read about in Revelation?
Yeah. So to unpack that, I was reading through, based on Pastor Chair Beth's recommendation, a book by a theologian named James K.A. Smith. And Smith has a lot to say about that kind of question, about how we properly orient our hearts. The title of the book, actually, to sort of give away some of the point, is You Become What You Love.
Sure.
And so what St. Augustine would argue, and Smith talks about this, is that the force that kind of orients or leads us to our properly ordered position is not what we think necessarily, it's what we love. So what we love the most will lead us to our proper position in creation, in God's order, and ideally that is in communion and relationship with God. But If our love is elsewhere, if our greatest love lies elsewhere, that will lead us to a disordered position. And so, for example, if the thing we love the most is our own comfort, is the experience of worship, if I make an idol out of the experience and I just love the feeling of the music, that's not going to lead me to the right place. That is actually going to shape within me a super consumeristic kind of mindset,
right?
Where it's all about, what I get out of it. Did I enjoy it or not? Mm-hmm. On the flip side, if our greatest love when we approach worship is the Lord, if we are there for Jesus, then that love takes us into a properly ordered position where the Spirit of God can do transformative work. Because worship is not just meant to be a spectator sport. Like you said, it's meant to be something that is transformational. That transformation doesn't just happen by me, singing a little louder or going on a week where the set list is really good. Mm-hmm. That work happens by the Spirit. And when the Spirit does its greatest work is when our love brings us closer to God, when we draw near and allow God to do that work.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I think folks sometimes, especially in church contexts like ours, worship is not meant to be a spectator sport, and also worship's not meant to be a contest, because when it's a contest, it can become pretty performative. And I think about so many of you who listen to this, or so many of you who have similar church contexts like Good Shepherd. There's sometimes we look at the person with their hands raised to the highest, or the person singing the loudest, and equate that with a level of worship rather than a personal representation of how God's on the move in that person's life. And I know a lot of people who run around, sing, have hands raised, and aren't worshiping. They're performing. And I know that can be true for myself. I know how I can look like I'm worshiping. How do you sort of reconcile the tension of, we want it to be this transformational experience, but like you said at the end of your answer, God's doing the work of the transformation. We're not, every time, the right song plays, we're not changing the trajectory of our lives. Like how does worship relate to sort of the slow walk of righteousness in general?
Yeah. The ultimate aim of our sanctification is being made more like Christ.
Okay.
The implication of that is that the aim of our sanctification is not looking more like really good church people.
Nice. Okay.
In a suburban context.
Yeah.
The end goal of that transformative work that God is doing in our hearts is not just so that, we might sing louder and raise our hands and, have 8 different color highlighted texts in our Bibles, and, we're always posting verses with cups of coffee and stuff. Mm-hmm. Like, the stereotype is not the goal. That's not the same as being made more like Christ.
Thanks for listening. We'll be right back.
Hey, if you're listening to the Encounter Faith podcast, something I know about you is you want to dive deep. Maybe you are someone who's been following Jesus for a long time. Maybe you're someone who has a lot of questions and you're looking everywhere for the right answers. Either way, the Good Shepherd Theology cohorts are for you. Good Shepherd Theology cohorts are coming back this fall, and I don't want you to miss the opportunity to sign up. This is a year-long intensive experience that allows everyone who participates to dive deeper into their relationship with God wherever they are at. We were able to run basically a pilot program all through last year, and God showed up, y'all. The Holy Spirit was on the move in powerful ways in these people's lives. And if you are someone who hears me describe this and goes, oh, I don't want homework, I don't want to go to a class, I promise you, because I saw it happen in the lives of every single person who participated in that program, that this is worth it. Give yourself the gift of experiencing cohorts for a year. If you have any questions or you're looking for more information, check out our website, gshepchurch.org/cohorts. We would love for you to experience our theology cohorts this year.
And to build upon that, where I think, and what Lutheran theology would suggest, is the fullest expression of the character of God, of Christ, is at the cross. And so you'll hear McKnight say Christoformity, being formed into the image of Christ, is the goal. I would argue cruciformity is the goal.
Okay.
Taking up the shape of the cross. Because the cross is something that's not just, my comfort Jesus, my therapist Jesus, my Jesus that has a certain image about him. The cross is a very raw image. Mm-hmm. It is a costly image. It is an image where discomfort and suffering are brought to the forefront. Mm-hmm. But that's where we believe God's character is most fully revealed. Mm. And so worship being something that sometimes has a cost or brings discomfort is something that I've found is a more full expression of worship than when, I'm sitting in my seat and everything's good and dandy. It's something that stretches you, that when you're staring down a circumstance that is far less than ideal, when you're driving into work and everything's got you angry, some coworker has inconvenienced you, you've hit like 4 red lights in a row, like that moment where you feel stretched and it is not comfortable to worship God through your service, through your words, through your song even, mm-hmm. through your prayer, any of those things, that is where the most complete expressions of worship are derived from. And a lot of the songs in Revelation would reflect a very similar thing. These sort of spiritual songs that you see throughout the Bible, going all the way back to the Exodus narrative and going all the way, through church history. The example I'm going to give is the spiritual songs that enslaved Christians would sing back in the day. That they would sing praises to God when their situation was horrible.
Right.
When oppression and persecution were their lived experience, there was still hope and confidence in the nature and the promises of God. And that wasn't sung from some comfortable seat with great instrumentation. That was a raw and authentic pouring out of worship. That I still have confidence in God. Though Rome and Babylon may assault and oppress and persecute, I'm still going to worship. And that act of resistance, that act of witnessing, that act of drawing nearer to God is what helps produce that real transformation.
So I'm curious for folks, because we talked about how this isn't just about like your personal preference around some of the songs you sing. But one of the things that I'm mindful of is, particularly in our well-resourced context of Naperville, it is actually quite hard for some of our folks. It's not only hard for them to do something that costs them something, they actually don't have a ton of context for it because of the way the world has been set up. I mean, you and I are not that different in that regard. There's actually very little cultural forces, we'll say, just to put a label to it, that are pushing me towards discomfort. I have a phone that has a personal algorithm that curates information. I have enough resources that I can be comfortable all the time. How do you walk with folks who associate that stretching you talked about with risk? Because every other area of their life where that type of uncomfort is felt, it is actually more, it feels like it's actually risk. It feels like it's actually danger. How do you help folks understand that God might be calling them to something new, and that just because it's uncomfortable doesn't mean it's not where that God's calling them?
Well, historically, in the context of the early church and even generations beyond that, to worship was to assume risk and danger.
Sure.
It was to be willing to give up everything. People decided in their act of worship that they loved the Lord more than they loved their own comfort or even their own lives, which is not something that's easy for us to grasp, because in the United States, we have the freedom to practice the religion we so choose. What I will say, though, is freedom of religion does not necessarily imply that there is still not any cost to following an authentic, true version of God. Because there is a comfortable way to follow God, and the comfortable and the easy way is to follow a version of God that is very palatable to the world that we live in. Whether that is, hyper progressive or hyper nationalist caricature of God, we make these compromises where it's like, I can have this little bit of God and this little bit of Babylon, and they can mix together and be okay. And even though we might not be facing down, death and imprisonment, it doesn't mean that's right. Just because the physical lived consequence might be the same. Spiritually, that consequence can also lead you to a very, very dark place. And so to follow God truly, to not back down from worship or biblical truth or witness about the character of God to, the powers of the world, that still might cost you something. It might make some of your, Facebook relationships a little bit more complicated. It might make people view you in a certain light that's not so charitable anymore. But what do you love more? Is your greatest love that affirmation that you get from, being the person who can have their cake and eat it too? Or I can be, a successful corporate businessman in the world and, great Christian man on Sundays? Like, is that affirmation the thing that you love the most? Because if it is, it'll drive you just to continue pleasing people instead of serving God. But if your greatest love is the Lord, that will shape you more into the image of Christ. And the more we are formed into the image of Christ, the less we get so hung up on what people think about our worship.
That's a good word, man. It makes me think about how the other danger of worship being a spectator sport or worship being a contest is it also creates a sense of deniability, ability for us to lie to ourselves, ability for us to not necessarily lie to other people, but cast what we're doing as more endorsed by some sort of, like you were saying, caricature version of who God is, because we're doing the things. I'm here at church on Sunday. I'm here. I'm doing the Bible study, and it's because of the ways in which my discipleship has been malformed or corrupted or whatever language you want to apply to it. It leads me to a place that actually isn't bearing good fruit, or it leads me to a place that actually is more antagonistic or inflammatory. But because I'm doing all these things, it feels like I'm doing it right. And it just allows me to feel like everyone else is wrong. What that makes me think of is, there's not a judgment in these conversations, because we're all capable of this. We all do different versions of what you've described. I remember someone talking once about cultural Christianity, and they're like, one of the first things the church has to realize is that cultural Christianity exists in all of us. We all like to take some of what Jesus said and go, but did he mean it though? Because it makes us feel better. And if you aren't that, dear listener, I would love for you to teach me teach me your ways. But that type of regular inner work to evaluate our worship, to evaluate our personal preferences, to ask God the question, where might he be calling us that will be uncomfortable? I think about a simple context for us of we offer two very distinct worship styles every Sunday morning. We offer more contemporary worship and more traditional worship. They are deeply connected through liturgy, through the message. They're not two separate experiences necessarily, but the music is very, very different. And then I think about all the different people who go to our congregation who intentionally go to both experiences. That may not be the hill for you, dear listener. That may not be a metric, but it is something for me. One of the things that I'm committed to doing is experiencing a fuller sense of who God is through the different worship experiences that we offer here. But if someone's hearing you describe this and is feeling convicted or feeling like you're talking directly to them, I'm curious what you hope they do next.
I would think the scriptures tell us what a full expression of worship looks like. That is that our bodies being presented as living sacrifices to God is our spiritual worship. And just how broadly that applies will change your perspective on worship a little bit. That if we are convicted when it comes to our worship, that paradigm is not just going to shift in the context of a service. That is a great place to start. It is a great place to be encouraged by the preaching of the word and the fellow people of God singing songs along with you. But that goes beyond your Sunday. Your worship is surrender to God in everything that you do. In the ways you do or don't bear witness to Christ, in the conversations you have with people, in the ways you serve other people. All of these things can be acts of worship. Your works reflect how your heart is oriented. They reflect who the object of your worship is. And if your life outside of Sunday just looks like everybody else, that might reflect that the object of your worship is success or your kid's success or the approval of other people. But if your works are reflective of somebody who is loyal to Christ and keeps the commandments of God, that is a witness to the fact that the object of your worship is God. And to have people see that even outside of the context of a Sunday morning service, when most of us are, part of the club already, to have people outside of the club see what that's like, man, what a difference could that make if our whole lives, if we thought of everything we do as worship.
Thank you for listening to the Encounter Faith podcast. This podcast is a service of G. Shep Productions from Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Naperville, Illinois. All rights reserved. If you're in the area, we'd love to meet you on a Sunday morning at our 9 a.m. or 10:45 services. At Good Shepherd, we are inviting everyone to walk together in the calling of Christ for a life of eternal impact. This podcast is produced and hosted by me, Ross Cochran. And our theme song is Wake the Earth by 1111 Worship. Thank you for listening. We'll talk again soon.